so glad that we have found it. There is true joy right here. Can someone also sit here?
So, dear Sangha, we'll ask for your support. We had rehearsed this song, but most of the friends we rehearsed with are not here right now, including our guitar players. So it's a little bit improv, so we hope you'll support us. On the choruses, we know will be very strong, and then the verses, we'll see what happens.
Here, and then I can sing too.
What? Oh, yeah. No, I don't really want to do that.
If you have your song sheets, the chorus will be on your song sheets as the wake-up song. I'm not sure what number it is, so you can... So if you have your song sheets, you can follow along there. Otherwise, you will hopefully pick up as we go.
Hopefully I can go with her, right? Nate's not here, so I can do.
You're the first one. That one.
Walking on the path, you can hear his heart whisper. Keep your spirit rolling, keep flowing in the road. Believe in yourself, let your heart be your guide. You can use yourself for rhythm, make your heart grow wide. There is more wonder in the world than you can say now. Stay true to your path, you don't have to see. Be compassionate and kind to your body and your mind. Practice patience. One day at a time. One day
at a time.
Yeah! See, it's a new community.
Time to wake up, be the Wake up, carrot. So this Sangha, can we offer flowers one more time? Woo! Thank you so much for being there. And when you hear the small sound of the bell, that is all the birds invited to stand up to welcome the Dharma teacher. We offer a talk today.
So, dear community, just to piggyback on the high energy, before we begin the talk today, I'd like to invite us to sing together a song, No Mud, No Lotus. It's on your the back of your schedule. It's called No Mud, No Lotus. So the chorus is very easy to pick up. And many of our friends here have not yet sung it. so let's experiment. So we'll begin with the end, and then we'll end with the end. No lotus, no mud, no lotus, no mud. So I'll ask you to join me when we start with No Mud, No Lotus, but we'll begin with No Lotus, No Mud. No Good morning, dear community. Before we begin, can you raise your hand if this is your first time coming for just the day of mindfulness? Okay, good. So most of us here have been at the retreat this whole time. Thank you. So we'll begin with a comfortable sitting posture. I'll let the energy come down a little bit. Breathing together, supporting one another, and we'll allow the 3 sounds of the bell to wash over us. Allow ourselves to really feel at home in our body. Dear respected Tay, dear noble community, good morning. Today is the June 24, 2018, and it's our 5th and final day of the Wake Up Retreat at Blue Cliff Monastery with the theme, For a Future to be Possible. Many of us here probably have the same feeling that I do, that I can't believe it's already the 5th day, so quick. And in honor of Pride Month, as you can see, our organizers were kind enough to remind us that it's Pride Month, and actually there will be a very large march in New York City. Someone billed it as the largest march worldwide. We'll see. So in honor of Pride Month, we'd like to welcome and thank all of our friends, no matter what gender orientation, sexual orientation, gender identity. Thank you for coming to practice with us and being part of our community. How many of us here either know someone in the LGBTQIA+ community or belong to that community? And how many of us support? Thank you. It's very beautiful. And I'd just like to also express my appreciation for that plus in the LGBTQIA+ community. I think it resonates with our practice that we are always, as practitioners, we're always exploring and asking ourselves who we are. And so that space of exploration, of being comfortable to not know is very important to acknowledge. So in this 5 days, we've been privy to so many beautiful experiences. Would you agree? Yeah. How many of us here have experienced this for the first time, a retreat like this? Yeah. So in our dharma sharing circles, we've heard some very deep sharings that have mirrored this kind of exploration, opening in insights that have happened during this retreat. And we've been invited from the very beginning, from orientation and from the first talk, to explore this theme of waking up. What does waking up, what does being a part of the wake up movement, what does participating in a wake up retreat mean to you? And we've had a chance to wake up to our capacities to see ourselves more deeply, to hear ourselves more deeply. We've waken up to our capacity to heal, to touch relief, and even to touch happiness. Many of us have experienced a deeper happiness for the first time in a retreat setting like this. And most importantly, we've had a chance to explore how to wake up to our capacity to grow and to change. And this is in part because of the environment, yes, but it's also a large part due to what you have brought to this experience. You yourself have brought all of who you are, both the strengths and the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, and bared it all in this retreat, and that's the fodder for our practice and our transformation. So first of all, we want to be clear that when we say wake up, we mean all of those things. We mean waking up to our suffering as well as to our happiness. And most importantly, waking up to a way of living that can help us to grow and change, to be in touch with the deeper reality of life that goes beyond our suffering, that goes beyond our superficial joys. In the first Dharma talk, I think the second day, Brother Promise had referenced the theme of this retreat as for a future to be possible. There are many things that we as practitioners can contribute in order to make our future a more beautiful future. And one very key aspect is how we are learning to relate differently to what in the past we may have called our ball and chains, our balls and chains, our suffering. So in this retreat, we have had a chance to look at our suffering in a new light. Maybe because we've been with like-minded people, we've had spaces where there is deep listening, we've had reminders to stop and actually listen to ourselves, to not run away. So this is a very key aspect for our future to be possible, to know how to relate in a beneficial way to our suffering. Right? So a ball and chain becomes a baby in the practice. And we don't treat a baby like a ball and chain. A ball and chain is something we want to unshackle ourselves from, throw away, run away from. But when we start to engage with our suffering like a baby, with the image of holding, embracing, and taking care, it becomes a very different, loving, wholesome, holistic relationship. And there's a lot of relief that comes just from having that shift in our way of relating to our suffering. So we wake up to our relationship with suffering. What is the more beneficial way to relate to our suffering? 2,600 years ago, we had the great fortune of having a teacher arrive in the world who walked this path and explored and discovered this very insight, the truth of our suffering. In modern day, we call it no mud, no lotus. Right? That our suffering is not separate from our happiness. That there is a purpose, there can be a very beneficial purpose to our suffering if we know how to relate to it. And when the Buddha became enlightened 2,600 years ago, he embodied that experience, this insight of no mud, no lotus. Or in more traditional terms, the Four Noble Truths. So, very simply, his awakening was to the interrelationship between suffering and happiness. The Buddha found a way and passed on the practices to help us look more deeply into our mud, to transform it into the flower, the lotus of happiness. He didn't say that we were to run away, negate, or push it down. And yet, in our daily life, this is often our habitual way of relating to our suffering, to negate it, to ignore it, to run away from it, to push it aside. Whether consciously or unconsciously, this is a very strong habit. So even though we may intellectually understand no mud, no lotus, yeah, suffering's there, happiness, no pain, no gain. We may intellectually understand it, but when push comes to shove, each one of us very easily slips into this habitual way of wrong thinking, wrong view about the nature of reality, and we try to escape, we try to run away from suffering. So coming back to your lived experience during this retreat, how many of us here has firsthand experienced, first of all, some relief from those stresses from outside? I would suspect all of us, right? At least a little bit. So that's your firsthand experience with a lotus coming from the mud. Because here at the monastery, we're not sharing practices to help you run away from your suffering. We're sharing and practicing along with you to help you to embrace, to relate to it differently. Okay? So obviously you've been practicing well if you've touched relief. You've been yourself exploring the Four Noble Truths. And I want to walk through these insights with you to help you recognize these seeds that are already alive in you, these insights that are already alive in you. Because the Four Noble Truths is not just an insight that came up when the Buddha became enlightened, but it was also a path of practice to keep coming back to live, to embody the insight. We have many different kinds of suffering. So we may feel like we've conquered it in this area, but oops, it pops up in another area. So it's an ongoing practice of uncovering, embracing, transforming our suffering, and touching happiness through that transformation, not despite the suffering. So as you have experienced it firsthand, I'm going to ask you to help me to identify some of these aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So the first Noble Truth is very simple but profound. It's that suffering is there. Many of us live maybe a life so busy or distracted that we forget to acknowledge this pain in our side, this barb, this splinter. We ignore it. As I said, we push it down, we ignore it. And so this is a very revolutionary act to stop and just to acknowledge that, yes, I am suffering. Yes, I need support. Yes, actually, I do have vulnerabilities. I have unskillfulnesses. In the past, I have acted unskillfully. And yes, I am human. For some of us, this comes very difficult to say, to acknowledge, because we don't have the conditions to trust in this process of looking and acknowledging, looking at our suffering and acknowledging. So how many of us here have had the chance to say at least one of those things? Yes, I suffer, I need support. I have vulnerabilities, I'm human, right? So this is the insight of the first noble truth. That's part of it. The second part of the first noble truth is to start to identify what those sufferings are, what those difficulties and challenges are, instead of continuing to go about our daily life and ignore them. We come to a place where it says, hey, it's actually a good thing to stop and not do. It's actually a good thing to stop and be still and to listen, to look into ourselves. So I'm going to ask you to volunteer some of those sufferings that you have recognized in this space of stillness and relative clarity, to share with us what is the collective or individual suffering that you recognize, the first noble truth. Yes. Missing your mom, okay. Yes. Self-judgment. Fear of missing out. And I appreciate you sharing, honestly, there's no wrong answer. It's whatever that you have touched that has caused a feeling of difficulty, challenge, and suffering in you. Mm-hmm. Yes. Flashbacks to trauma, reliving trauma. Anger, self-doubt, strong emotions. Yes. Afraid of not being good enough. Two more. Fear of deeper connections to others. Good. I don't mean good as in I'm glad you have that. I mean, that's a good recognition. Yes. Yes. Estrangement. Now, some of these, this awareness of this reality in our psyche, in our physical and mental, physically and mentally, we may have been somewhat aware of these things, but they've been floating a little bit out of focus because we've chosen not to bring it front and center. But part of the path of the Four Noble Truths is to create that space for us to begin to take care of our suffering. So just to be able to acknowledge and then to be able to name is already the path towards happiness. Right? So thank you for taking that time to acknowledge, the courage to share that out with yourself and with others in the community. So identifying these areas, maybe we can look in a more general, global way at the things that have been volunteered. These areas of strong emotions, judgment, blame, social disconnect, social insecurity, they all create a kind of stress in the body. Both mental stress, insecurities, anxieties, worries, and physical stress. And this is in our present day especially prevalent because our pace in society is so quick, it doesn't readily give us, we have to actively find space and time to take care, to de-stress, to relax, to be reminded by bells of mindfulness, by other people just looking and smiling at us and saying, how are you? Breathe, smile, right? Out there, it's much harder to come by unless we actively seek that out. So this area of stress is something for us to recognize in our daily life. When are we feeling physical stress? When are we feeling mental or emotional stress? Can we continue to acknowledge that instead of being the stoic? Can we continue to identify it, find it in the body? or do we push it away? How many of us here suffer from over busyness? That's something that I personally suffer from, right? Busyness, its relative is distraction. So we can be busy from work, we can be busy from our own habits of entertaining ourselves. And the end result is, again, we don't have the space and time to really listen to our inner needs and to begin to take care of those stresses that have been accumulating. So can we identify when we're running on, what's it called, red? We're in the red, we're running low. Running on empty, yes. Can we actually identify that as the First Noble Truth? Many of us here have had a breath of fresh air coming into the monastery because we see other people who have a sense of direction and it resonates with us for the first time. This is a deep malaise in our society, a feeling of lack of direction, lack of meaning. And it's related again to how we spend our time and energy. If we don't take the time to invest, to listen deeply, to look deeply into our needs, the needs of society, then we will live in a very superficial way. We will tend to grasp at those easy habit energies that are easily assuaged through entertainment, through food, through distractions. And lastly, related to this is a sense of disconnect with who we are, right? A disconnect and a sense of dispersion. So many of us, we also have this seed of loneliness in us. And because of this seed of loneliness, we seek ways to address it in ways that are not so healthy, through distraction, through busyness, through ignoring our pain, through pretending. And the breath of fresh air is that here we have a chance to recognize it without judging. We recognize, oh, my old habit energy. I see you now. And so this is the First Noble Truth. So part of the mud is that we suffer from it. But even in the midst of the mud, there's a lotus growing from that. From that awareness, we have now an anchor point to look more deeply at these suffering and to look at the causes of the suffering. And that is the Second Noble Truth. One of the wonderful news is about practice is that there have been many practitioners who have gone before us to show us the way. We, of course, have to do our part, which is to actually engage in the practice and explore for ourselves these truths. But we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I'm going to cut right to it. The Buddha said, the Second Noble Truth, the causes of our suffering lie in our cravings, our attachments, and our ignorance. It's no shame to acknowledge these aspects in ourselves. We all have, because of lack of practice perhaps, lack of experience, life experience, lack of understanding, inherited or developed maladaptive habits. And this is in our way of thinking, that's the brain. In our way of acting, that's the hand. And in our way of speaking. Okay. we've all developed maladaptive ways and also skillful ways, but when we're talking about mud, we're talking more about the suffering, unskillful, maladaptive habits from our way of thinking, from our past way of relating to suffering. So someone says something mean to us, we say something doubly mean back to them, right? Someone acts unskillfully, and instead of giving rise to a heart of compassion and looking more deeply to understand, we judge them for being them. Out of craving or aversion, we act in ways that cause harm to the environment, right? In our way of consuming, over-consuming, in our way of exploiting other people's time. So this is from our craving and our attachment. We also have blind spots, that's our ignorance. As human beings, we are blessed to have the capacity to always learn, to grow. So there's, again, no shame in acknowledging that we are ignorant in some ways. In some areas we are growing, and in some areas there are still blind spots. And so where there are still blind spots, there is still craving and attachment. And so the difficulties, the challenges that come our way, the vicissitudes of life, we still give rise to maladaptive habits. And those habits then cause more suffering. And this is what we call the cycle of samsara. The Four Noble Truths helps us to, instead of spiraling down into this cycle of samsara, you hit me, I hit you back, it helps us to find a new way out. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but we go more deeply into our suffering in order to find a different way. And this is our way out of suffering, our way out of samsara. Okay. So once we have clearly, as practitioners, we have identified some of those areas that we've been suffering from, I'm inviting you to now take the dharma and bring it in as a lens. Your way of interacting with your friends or family that have been causing you pain, causing them pain. Your way of relating to material things, the way you consume, the way you eat. How does that relate to craving? How does that relate to aversion? How does that relate to ignorance, delusion? And we begin to have this telescopic, more general sense of our suffering from this lens so that we can know what tools, what ways to practice with these difficulties in a beneficial way. Okay? So we always take heart from the practice because it empowers us. It always points us continually in a direction. Rather than identify and feel like we're stuck, it identifies to help us have a direction. And that's exactly where the Noble Truths lead us. When we can see the causes more clearly, it's because I'm craving all the time recognition, that whenever I interact with someone who doesn't give me recognition, I suffer. Then it gives us a direction out to practice with that. And that's the third Noble Truth. There is a way. There's a way to end suffering. It's not an ongoing morass. We're not drowning in our suffering. But actually, as I said, there's a purpose to the suffering. There can be, and it is to give us direction to look more deeply. It's very beautiful to hear people's transformation during a retreat. A lot of it, I think, has to do with identifying that pressure point in our life and finding a way to release it. Like in acupuncture, You put the needle in the right place and it'll let your circulation flow. Or our massage therapists, no? Like if you have a knot, it's blocking you. And if you know how to identify the location, the nature of that knot, and know how to work it out, there's a circulation and a flow. And we were talking earlier about stress as being one of the main challenges in our society, mental and physical stress. So the third noble truth is to let us know that there is a way to relieve this stress. And we've experienced it again firsthand here. How many of us have touched a kind of breath of fresh air in Dharma sharing? Yeah. Was that from your sharing or from your listening, or both? So I'm going to ask you, why is Dharma sharing so powerful? I mean, you talk to people all the time outside there anyway, right? So what is it about this quality of sharing and interacting that has really relieved some pressure, opened up some space for you? Yes. Bearing one's own vulnerability, acknowledging one's vulnerability. Mm-hmm. So that's a pressure point because maybe in the past we've been too fearful. We don't have a safe enough space to be that 5-year-old child. Yes. Deep listening has gotten our friend out of her head thinking and into her body and has grounded her more in the present moment. I would just add to that. Right? Right. Yes. A unique space without judgment. Okay. I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Found it again. Thank you. One more. Why is Dharma sharing and our informal interactions during a retreat so reliefful? Depth. It allows us to touch more depth and to connect more deeply, more truly. Right? So we were talking about how a practice environment helps us to have a relief from stress. It's because it's really the right tools, the right way to address the things coming up from us in a way that's realer, that's not superficial, that goes to the heart of it in a way that's loving, that's not judgmental. And all of that means it's a safe space. It's a safe place that you have created for others as part of this community, and you have benefited from this holding of this space. And why are we talking about this now? It's because these are the very things that we are bringing back outside of this retreat, that we are invited to actively cultivate in our environment so that we don't lose these beneficial conditions. We know that we have the capacity to touch meaning, to touch depth, to find relief, to engage in life in a wholesome way, because we've touched it here. And our invitation is now to bring that inherent capacity out there, to find the support to continue that. Okay, so we don't want to, from being a stream flowing here, opening up, being vulnerable, we don't want to go back there and turn into a pressure cooker again, right? That's not the right direction. That's not the way the Four Noble Truths are pointing us to. So we see the suffering, we recognize it, and we know that there's a way to end it. And the way to end the suffering, to transform suffering, is the fourth noble truth. The blooming of the lotus is the practice. The practice that you've already encountered through the 5 mindfulness trainings. Today it was incredibly empty on the sides because most of y'all were in the middle. And it was beautiful to see all of our friends committing to really concretely practicing, to touch a noble path, a path we call the Noble Eightfold Path, a path that will lead us in the direction of well-being. And our teacher, he's ever desirous of connecting to psychologically connecting with us in an easier way. So he has actively retranslated the end of ill-being as the birth, the manifestation of well-being. So the lotus, you can see it as a lotus is, the end of the mud, but it's not so nice to call the lotus as end of the mud. So we can also see the flowering of our practice as our happiness, our well-being. And again, this highlights the relationship, the necessity of us engaging fruitfully with our suffering, because it is actually the avenue to our happiness. Right? So the path is we call the Noble Eightfold Path, which I'm sure many of us have heard of, through the lens of the 5 mindfulness trainings. It is a teaching and a practice that encompasses every aspect of our emotional, physical, mental life. Some of us, maybe you signed up for the Wake Up Retreat for community, to connect with people that maybe have a like-mindedness, but did you know that you are actually stepping into a very time-honored tradition, Because this well-being, some of us are like, not really, right? Because this well-being that we experience is all founded on our practice of mindfulness, concentration, and insight. And our mindfulness is held up by our commitment to training our mind and our body through the 5 mindfulness trainings. And so that is why every time we see someone take the 5 mindfulness trainings, seriously commit to that, it's a deep joy for our community, because those are the very steps that are needed in order to wake us up. We cannot just intellectually not suffer anymore. We have to walk the path. We have to embody the path with our practice. Thinking, speech, action. Okay. So when we go back home and we have the 5 mindfulness training certificate in our pocket, again, we don't want you to keep it in your pocket. When the monastics ordain and we receive the higher precepts, we are told that this is not a promotion. When we receive the lamp, the dharma lamp, we are transmitted that, we are told that this is not like a diploma. It's not an acknowledgement so much as an encouragement on our path. So the 5 mindfulness trainings there are now concretely a part of your lifestyle if you so choose to make it. 3 months is a very long time to review something so fundamental to your happiness, right? So with the conditions out there, that's why it's very intelligent practice to connect now, to think about Sangha now when the conditions are still favorable and you're not worrying about deadlines and bills and crises. Because the 5 mindfulness trainings, our relationship with it, our review with it, is the foundation for us to keep coming back to the process, the practice that will give us a deepening of our path. When we practice the 5 mindfulness trainings, it means we become more aware of issues that we have in the past just ignored or acted out of habit. How do we consume? How many of us committed to the 5th mindfulness training? Right? In our Earth Holders retreat, we always emphasize the 5th mindfulness training. If you are seriously an environmentalist, there's no way that you can be a serious environmentalist and not consider, practice, and review the 5th mindfulness training on consumption. So this helps us to actively look at our lifestyle. I say that I protect the environment, but how do I live my life that actually manifests that actually supports that? I say I want to be compassionate, but the 4th mindfulness training gives me a reflection on how I speak, which may not be so kind, may not nurture other people's joy, hope. So when we engage in the 5 mindfulness trainings actively, what it is doing is giving us the conditions to go deeper in the Noble Eightfold Path. I really enjoy that word, noble. I really appreciate that word. Because you know what the opposite of noble is, right? It's definitely not nourishing. What is noble is something that nourishes you, that brings you to a higher plane, and in that process it also brings others, the environment, those around you, to a higher plane. So please don't neglect your 5 mindfulness trainings. Bang here. Today, when I was looking at the ordinees, so Bang is our aspirant. She's aspiring for monastic life, and just to give her flowers. And it was very beautiful to see her, even though she's taking on the monastic vows, to also commit to the 5 mindfulness trainings. Because actually, the 5 mindfulness trainings are the very foundation. Our precepts as monastics, our precepts as 14 mindfulness trainings, order of interbeing members, are all based on the 5 mindfulness trainings. So I felt like she's taking care of everything from the ground up, being very careful with her commitment to this path. And some of us have just committed to 1 or 2, and that's wonderful because it means that you have a conscientious relationship with it. It's not like you're taking it lightly, but you're really measuring your capacities and your commitment and wanting to honor that. And I wanted to, again, emphasize that when we speak of honoring, it means that we don't necessarily have to keep it perfectly, but we have a faithful relationship to come back and review it. Okay? And so some of us have taken it for the first time, some of us have renewed our 5 mindfulness trainings with that same intention, to renew our relationship, to have a more pure relationship with our practice. So this morning, our bookshop sisters very skillfully touched base with me about if there was any materials that might be helpful to recommend. And since I was focusing on no mud, no lotus, our relationship with suffering, I mentioned this book. So you might be interested to explore more deeply our relationship with right view of suffering and how we can translate it through the practice of the 5 mindfulness trainings to go further, go more deeply on the Noble Eightfold Path. This is a book by our teacher, one of the many. Okay. So lastly, to come back to no mud, no lotus. Does anyone remember the song? Is it kind of in the back of your mind? No lotus, no mud. No lotus, no mud. Okay, we're just planting seeds here. So the last thing I'd like to come back to is no mud, no lotus. We've been practicing these past 5 days to nourish our joy and to honor our suffering. Our teacher calls it the goodness of suffering, recognizing what is the benefit of suffering. Yes, no one likes to suffer, but the benefit of suffering, one of the very beautiful flowers that comes from us having to go through challenges and difficulties in life, is that we can then have a very true understanding, a true compassion for others who have or are undergoing similar difficulties and challenges. And from that place of compassion, from that place of practicing with it, to come out of it like a phoenix, to come out from the ashes, then we can help. We can help others to find their way. But only when we engage with it and are not drowning in it, are not being overwhelmed by it, can we then reach out to others to help them find their own way. So that is one of the beauties of this practice. It helps us use suffering to give rise to a true compassion, true empathy, true understanding for the plight of others. And we really need more of that. Sometimes we just need a compassionate look in order to help us gently on our path. We just need a gentle, understanding smile or kind eyes, non-judgmental eyes for us to have some wind beneath our wings to continue forward. And this is what we ourselves can offer to others. If we forbear to continue to engage in our transformation of suffering and not run away from it. Another benefit, this is to help us motivate when we wake up and we feel we really don't want to deal with that issue. Remember, it's enlarging your heart, first of all. Secondly, it's the motivation to help us live more deeply. To look beyond the superficial pleasantries that we may have been running after. Because once we hit a rough spot, it causes us to reassess what's important in our life. And those of us who may have lost a loved one, met with sudden change, we are very well aware that there's a lot more to life than those things that we may have been running after or distracting ourselves with. But we don't want to wait until those situations happen. So now is the time to start to embrace, to grapple with those smaller, those habitual daily maladaptive behaviors that are causing us suffering. It's a way to kind of strengthen our capacity so that when the larger vicissitudes happen, we will already have a way forward, a way in to come out. So honor our suffering, and to honor our suffering means really to honor ourselves. Suffering is a part of us, and it's also a part of our ancestors. We may have inherited much of our maladaptive behaviors from mom and dad, from their difficulties in their own life, present and past, from their childhood. When we listen to the meditation on the 5-year-old child, it's to help us get in touch with this universal aspect of our suffering. It's not our burden to bear alone. It also belongs in part to our ancestry. And when we can begin to acknowledge that and not push it away, it means we are honoring our roots. We are honoring our weaknesses and strengths through our ancestors, and there's healing in that. Just like the blame that we may touch when we think of others who cause us to suffer, when we reflect on the kind of pain that we receive when we are the recipient of that blame, when we are the recipient of judgment, and we can see that again, there's a stress, there's a place, an obstacle in moving forward, in having our heart open and be vulnerable, then this is our motivation to come back to ourselves and look again. Our suffering, our ancestral suffering, is there a way that we can revisit it without the eyes of blame or judgment, but from a place of more compassion? I'm suffering now. My parents may have suffered just like I did when they were younger. They may have had conditions that I don't even know about. And this is, again, the acknowledgement of the first noble truth, not just in ourselves, but in our loved ones around us. The person that has caused us suffering, they have suffering too. And what might that be? So I'd like to leave us with 3 concrete reminders as we step out back into the world, of how we can take good care of our mud. Take care of your mud. Okay, just like a good gardener doesn't chuck the soil, but knows how to incorporate and bring compost in to freshen up and cultivate the soil for the vegetables to grow, we too are gardeners of our happiness. So we need to know how to maintain our practice. So first of all, bring these elements. The encouragement is to bring these elements into your daily life. Allow things to settle. Allow the sediment, the craziness, the busyness to settle through a daily practice of meditation. When we sit and when we practice stopping to touch the sound of the birds, to be in touch with our breath, to be in touch with the stress and the tension and release in our body, we're allowing that whirlwind of busyness, distraction, chaos to settle. And we need to actively bring this element in, or else what's helping us other than our practice and our Sangha? That's a challenge. What else is there that's helping us? What? our physical environment if we're lucky. But most of us, do you have a physical environment that's telling you to stop and just chill out? Right? So you yourself, your mud, you're taking care of your mud by actively bringing this in. Settle, and this means meditation. Meditation means stilling, stopping, and looking, listening more deeply to ourselves. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a regular practice every day. How many of us have already do that? Maybe 2/3. How many of us here can commit? I'd like to see all of us raise our hand. Commit to a more regular practice. If you have 5 minutes, can you make it a little bit longer? Like 7? If you just sit once a week with your Sangha, can you find a space, a breathing space in your home? You know you've touched the benefit here, so can you make that space and activate the presence of meditation right in your home space? Again, can we commit something concrete? Right? Okay, that means one step further. We're taking a little bit more initiative in our responsibility for our own happiness, our own sanity. Okay, talking about mud. Want to recommend that we sift through the mud regularly, kind of like a gold miner. With our 5 mindfulness trainings practice, if we're lucky, we already belong to a Sangha. Like the monastics, we recite our precepts every 2 weeks. As a local Sangha, some of you already recite and have dharma sharing about it once a week, once a month, twice a month. And really, there's a lot of book clubs where we share about the books, even our teachers' books. That's great, but it would be even more beneficial to delve into how we're practicing the 5 mindfulness trainings. So you Sangha builders out there, if you are looking at ways to spice up your Sangha life, you might like to consider bringing in this element of discussion about the 5 MTs, focusing on a particular training and even a particular phrase, and getting really into the nitty-gritty of our collective and individual practice. So sift through your mud, your daily habits, your daily areas of ignorance or neglect, by using the lens, the mirror of the 5 mindfulness trainings. And lastly, contribute to the collective. Some of us are more solo, some of us are more social, but all of us, without exception, have benefited from Sangha. Because Sangha has enough space to hold both the conditions for connection and the conditions that we need to go inward. That's the beauty of a community of practice. We are not a social club, but we are also not solo artists that happen to live next to one another and know nothing about one another. So our part for our own well-being and to help out with the collective is to connect with Sangha and to contribute our own presence and practice to the Sangha. So if you haven't already, Sanghify yourself. Okay? Sanghify yourself, because it's a mutual thing. The more we offer, the more we are nourished, and the more we can transform, and the larger our capacity for happiness becomes. So in short, this is our way of holding our suffering. No mud, no lotus. No mud, no lotus is the very path of, this path is the very path of happiness. So we're going to turn our understanding on its head. So I want so much that when when in daily life something comes up, and even though we have that initial, oh no, not again, in the back of your head you're hearing, oh, no, no. Can I share, Brandon, with something that you shared about happy? So in Dharma sharing the other day, Brandon was sharing about his transformation, that in the restroom and showering time is usually when a lot of afflictions come up, because that's usually the time when he's alone. But this time around, instead of it being a time of affliction, he caught himself singing happiness is here and now, and it just came up from somewhere. Where did it come up from? From his practice and experience together with all of us here, right? And he even said, but that song is too short. So I'd like to really plant that seed of that song, No Mud, No Lotus, as a place, as a reminder and as a refuge and as a motivation to go beyond our habit of suffering and engage in the practice so our suffering can become that lotus. I would like to end with that song again, with that very purpose. And this time I'd like to invite all of us to sing that together. Okay? Just imagine you're in the shower